Hi everyone, and welcome to JCM 180. This is for college students at the introductory level. And today's talk will be about how to conduct an interview. So in order to understand how to conduct an interview, you first have to understand what an interview really is. And so I would define an interview as talking to another individual with the distinct purpose of gathering information about a subject. So this might be about a story you're writing, or about a person. And interviews can be formal or informal, so you might sit down with a person with a list of questions and have an interview that way, or you might have a more informal interview where you're just talking to someone and asking them a few questions off the cuff. And so why do journalists interview? We as journalists interview our subjects and other adjacent individuals for many reasons, but the purpose is largely to gather information about a story, and sources can also be used to reveal unheard of information or determine other valuable sources. So, for example, in a story about the University of Alabama, you might speak to the university president or some students, and you might ask them who you should speak to next about your story, and they might give you other valuable sources. So that's an example of how interviews can help you find other people to talk to. And another purpose of interviews is that they give stories a human angle and make them more real or relatable. So something I've often heard is that sources and their quotes from interviews can be used to kind of say the things that we as journalists can't say. So for example, we might know of an opinion about a story or a topic, but we can't really explicitly say it because we're supposed to be objective. But sources are what give those stories a more human angle and kind of envelop the opinion into the story. So I have some do's and don'ts for interviews here. For the do's, do make good effort to get in contact with your sources. Sometimes you won't be able to reach a source that you want to speak to, and you'll just have to prove that you did indeed reach out. And this is really important because it's crucial that journalists give the people they're writing about a opportunity to respond to their story. So for example, you might be criticizing someone. You want them to be able to tell their side of the story and stand up for themselves, and otherwise, if you don't, it looks unfair. So you have to make a good effort to get in contact with people in order to say, no, we reached out to you and you just didn't respond for comment. But on another hand, you want to treat people like humans and be respectful of their stories. So you might be talking to people who are in vulnerable mindsets, or maybe they are going through some grief, and you don't want to intrude on them. You want to be very respectful and, find out the hard information, but at the same time, don't overstep your boundaries. You also want to use the best sources possible and the closest sources into a story. So, for example, like I said, with the University of Alabama, you would want to speak to the university president if at all possible, or someone from his office. The sources that are closest to your story will have the most inside information and maybe the most valuable information. Another thing you want to do as a journalist in an interview is identify yourself as a reporter. And this could be, maybe you're emailing someone and asking if they're available to interview sometime in the next week. You always want to say who you are and what publication you're with. Or if you're a student, you can say, I'm a student journalist. And that's really important so that they understand that what they're saying is on the record and can be used in news stories. Along those same lines, you want to set ground rules. There are certain states within the US where you can record someone without their permission and it's still legal. But there are also certain states where both parties who are being recorded need to know. So it's really important that you first ask if you can record if you're in a state where you need to ask. It's also important that you maybe tell them how long the interview is going to take, things like that. So just so that people have the same expectations as you do going into the interview. And then for the don'ts, I have on here, don't accept any gifts in return. This is really important because it could look like a bribe. So maybe someone wants you to interview them for a story for your website, but you can't accept money in return, or honestly even food or coffee, because it can look like you were incentivized to write a story. So it's really important for objectivity to not accept any gifts in return for writing a story. Additionally, I have don't be rude or insensitive. That kind of goes along with treating your sources like the humans that they are. You want to be careful and kind to your sources. I also have on here, don't forget to prepare or research your interviewee if that's applicable. You want to ask really good questions and you want to know what you need to ask going into the interview. And so that might have something to do with preparing the best questions possible, or researching the background of your interviewee so that you know what kinds of questions to ask, all those things. Also, don't rely on online interviews. In-person interviews are the best possible way to get good information from your sources. Online interviews have the downside of being they can rehearse what they're going to say, or they have in a written interview, say they're emailing you, they get to spend time editing their words. So in an in-person interview, the perks are kind of that you get body language from them and facial expressions. You might be able to tell when they're uncomfortable easily, that kind of thing. As well as you get information that is not edited. So you're getting their raw words. Along with that, I have to not begin with the hard questions. You want to let the interviewee warm up first and maybe ask some easy questions like their name, their profession, their title, that sort of thing, before you start asking the hard questions. Asking hard questions first can just kind of turn your source off of the interview, and so you want to make sure that you ease them into it because it's not natural for everyone. You also don't want to ask any leading questions, and a leading question is a question that makes the interviewee think that they need to respond a certain way. So open-ended questions are really the best way to go about things, but you really want to avoid leading questions. You also don't want to interrupt your source. This goes along with being rude, and not interrupting your source is really important because the interview is not about you. It's not about your opinions. So you don't want to interject your own opinion and interrupt that way. But you also don't want to interrupt with your next question. You don't want to get ahead of yourself and start thinking about what you need to ask next and cut them off, because an interview tip that I have is to just let your source keep speaking and let the awkward silences happen, because human nature is to fill those awkward silences, and if you don't do it, your source will do it. And they'll keep giving you good information, or they'll give you a deeper side to a story that they're telling when you don't interrupt them. So here's some important questions that I think every journalist should ask when they're interviewing. The first one is to have your source spell their name to you, so that you get it right in publication. It's really important that you don't misspell names during publication. It can have just a host of different issues that come along with misspelling a name in a publication. Another one I use quite often is, I didn't quite understand that. Could you dumb it down? I think it's always better to look dumb during the interview than look dumb when something's published incorrectly. So asking that question ensures you get all the details right. My last question is always, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you think I should know? And this is really important because it opens up the floor to the interviewee to tell you any piece of information that they think you need to know for the story you're writing, and they know their field best. And then along with that, I always ask if there's anyone else I should speak to about the story I'm writing. Again, they know their field best, and so if they have colleagues or someone that they know of who might answer your questions well or answer questions better, then they can direct you to that person when you ask this question. So here's just some more detail on why in-person interviews are better. There are instances when a digital interview is going to be necessary, but usually in-person interviews allow you to gather the most and the best information based on social cues, the source's personality, getting some off-the-cuff information, and also it's easier to add follow-up questions when you're interviewing a source in person. I will also say, doing a Zoom call is better than a phone call, and in-person is better than a Zoom call. So that's kind of the tier. Next we have this YouTube video. This is a TED Talk by Mike Dronkers, and it's called How to Interview Almost Anybody. Alright, so that was the TED Talk. He just kind of goes more in detail with a few things I said, and this brings me to my next point, which is another tip that he says in the TED Talk, but that I didn't include for redundancy. But the best interview tip that I have is to just shut your mouth. Just don't talk. Again, like I said earlier, let the awkward silence be awkward and learn to not fill it because you want your subject to fill it. Because that's when you get the most exciting, new, interesting information. It's like asking for more information without having to say anything. And human nature is to fill that silence, so they will fill it. I've never had it not happen. So here's our assignment for today. We're going to get in groups of 2 and practice interviewing each other about your lives before college. Try to get as much information as possible about your partner in the next 10 minutes, so you'll each have 5 minutes to interview the other. Then you're going to introduce your partner to the class and we will discuss. And I'll ask you some questions, and you might not be expecting my questions to be what they are. So try to get some good information on your partner, and then we will talk about it as a class. Thank you.